People talk about like you join startups and if the startup is not famous or it's not like a TikTok and all, if it's not known, it doesn't add any value to your CV. What's your take on this?
I think a lot of employers truly do value people with startup experiences, even more so now today, right? Because I think especially through COVID-19, right, we've seen a lot of startups pop up in the digital space, especially for commerce, right? So I think it was something that I took a gamble on. I felt that having that startup experience, that broad base of experience, the diversity of experiences that you get from a startup will be truly valuable. And at least from what I garnered through the interview, it was something that put me in good stead, because it does, you're faced with like difficult decisions that you have to make, the softer skills that you have to develop when you're as part of a startup. I think these are things that established employers would value for sure, and especially if they're looking to change themselves internally. I think one phenomenon that probably a lot of companies are experiencing today is the need for change, internal change, or even intrapreneurship for that matter. And especially more so given the COVID-19 situation. Let's talk about the context of retail. Brick and mortar, had to be shuttered during the circuit breaker in Singapore or even overseas for that matter. A lot of them had to take to doing online commerce for the first time. And I think throughout this experience, a lot of businesses will have probably learned the need to be nimble, and correspondingly that informs their hiring decisions, right? They will probably want to bring in people, fresh blood, that, have that daring do and that ability to think very quickly on their feet and, make the right decisions and maybe not make the right decisions, but make a decision that is informed at that point in time, given whatever information you have, and, hopefully things will stick. So I think the point for me describing all that is that the startup skill set as a whole is something that I think is very valuable in today's hiring context, because you are put in situations where you simply would never experience if you're working in a typical established corporation, right? Like I said, you work within a certain silo, these are your deliverables, that's it. Whereas on the other hand, if you're in a startup, if you don't do your work, it clearly shows in that, you guys are simply not bringing in money, and, 1 week later, your company may fold. Juxtapose that to you working in an established organization. Sure, I may slack off a little bit, not do my work properly, but life goes on, right? The cogs in the machine still continues turning. So I think it's a very different mindset, and I think employers of today would value that mindset because it adds that so-called flair that potentially will allow established organizations to reinvent themselves for the future.
I relate to what you said. I agree to what you said. I think a lot depends on the context as well in terms of who's the employer looking to hire for what kind of role. And I would think you might agree with me that Lazada back in 2019 and even now, in my opinion, is still a bit of a not the mainstream kind of big company that I think we are familiar with. So I think that probably also influenced the way they hire. But maybe that it's very specific and not all companies may think this way. There's this thing about like signaling effect, right? If you're hired by a big firm, like an MNC, a bank, or a Google, or your Netflix, or Facebook, there's a signaling effect that we put this name in your CV. It shows that you were hired by these top tech companies. It means that you have passed certain standards. If they want you, means there's something good in you, and therefore there's a lot of value in what you do. So I think that's the other side of the argument that I've also heard about. But for sure, I agree with you that the kind of experiences that we have had in startups is tremendous, and the kind of stress, I think, is different compared to an MNC. It is different, and it's very much needed, I feel, in the fast-changing world that we're in. There's a lot of, it's quite VUCA, right? It's volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. So I totally relate to you. And for sure, I've got guests who came on this show and told me the opposite different things. And I think another factor that affects this is also like the stage of your career you're at. If you're an early stage career, then the employer might feel that, okay, there's still worth a chance, or there's still time for you to groom you and to grow you. Versus if you're a later stage. I think that's one potential perspective. I mean, I'm happy to hear comments or views that may offer a different perspective.